They say heat don't carry weight, but out here, it presses on you like a memory you can't shake. That summer, the sun rose angry and stayed that way. My boots left prints in dirt cracked like old leather, the kind that doesn't forgive. I lived 20 miles from the nearest town, and that wasn't by accident. Distance was the point. Space gave me room to breathe, to forget the sound of screaming, to stop hearing the war when it wasn't there. Folks used to ask if the land was any good. I'd tell them the truth. It wasn't worthless, just difficult. A few stubborn rows of corn grew under a sky that hadn't rained in 9 weeks. I tended them same as I did everything else, slow, quiet, and alone. My mule died 2 springs back. I didn't replace it. Didn't see the point. I did the work myself, one task at a time, like penance for sins I never named out loud. I was 38 then. Used to be a sharpshooter with the Union Army. Left with a scar that split across my left shoulder like a crooked river and a lung that never quite filled right again. I didn't limp, but I breathed slower than most men. That didn't bother me. I'd learned to keep pace with silence. The war ended, but I carried it home. Couldn't seem to set it down. I stopped talking the day I buried my wife Rachel and our little girl May. Comanche raid. Middle of the night. I wasn't fast enough. I wasn't enough. After that, the cabin shrank in on itself. The noise of laughter, of bedtime stories, and humming in the kitchen, it all got swallowed up. What was left was the scrape of my shovel, the creak of old wood, the whisper of wind through a broken window. I preferred it that way. At least I thought I did. I didn't need visitors, didn't want explanations or condolences. Men came by in the early days, offered help. I turned them all away. Grief turns into habit if you let it. Mine did. That's the place I was in, hardened, settled, dust-coated and hollowed out like a tree still standing but long dead inside. And then, one night, fence rails in my hand, sun bleeding into the hills behind me. Something changed. A shadow moved on the far side of my land. Small, slowed, wrong shape for a man. I didn't know it yet, but everything I thought was done in me, the part that had stopped hoping, stopped hurting, stopped reaching, it stirred. But that's a moment for another telling. All I can say is this: I didn't go looking to be needed. I didn't think I had anything left to give. But sometimes something finds you anyway. And if you're lucky or foolish enough to answer the door, you just might find out you were still alive after all. If this story finds you at the right time, I hope you'll stick around. Leave a comment, share a piece of yourself if you feel it. Hit that like button if the dust in these words settles right. And if you believe in quiet things growing strong again, go on and subscribe. There's more to tell. And I'd be honored to tell it with you. Eli Ward. The sun was just starting to slide behind the hills when I noticed the fence rail had split clean through. Dry rot, brittle and stubborn. I was crouched low with a hammer in one hand, bracing the board against my knee, sweat sliding down the side of my face and soaking through my shirt. The day had been too long, like all of them lately, and the light had turned that kind of gold that makes a man feel older than he is. I had a nail between my teeth, just one more to go, when something caught in the corner of my eye movement, slow and offbeat, out near the far line of the property where the brush curls up against the rise. At first I figured it was a deer, maybe a dog, but it moved different, dragging one foot a little, favoring the other, like every step hurt more than the last. My head turned slow and deliberate, the way you learn to move after too many years watching the world through a rifle scope. I squinted, but the sun was behind her, making the shape all blur and shadow. Still, I knew right away it wasn't a man. The way she walked barefoot, hair loose and swinging, no hat, no sense of direction, told me that much. I stood, not rushed, just steady. One hand drifted toward the hatchet on my belt, not to draw it, just to let it rest there. Habit. I didn't call out, didn't wave. I've never been one to break silence before it's needed. She kept coming. When the distance closed enough, I saw her clearly, Apache maybe, or mixed, young but worn, with skin sunburnt and cracked at the mouth. Her dress was torn at the neckline, clinging to her from sweat, and the kind of travel that leaves blisters open and bleeding. One sleeve was gone entirely, the other hanging loose at the elbow, and the shape of her left breast was half exposed where the fabric had given up trying to hold. Her feet were cut, bleeding. Her arms scratched up, like she'd walked through brush too thick to be passable, and hadn't flinched once doing it. There was a bruise under her collarbone, angry and purple, but she didn't stumble. She walked right up to me, 6 feet away, no closer, and stopped, breathing hard, hands at her sides, not raised, not hiding. And her eyes, Lord, those eyes, they weren't begging. They weren't even asking. Not really. There was fear there, yes, and desperation too, but beneath that, something steadier, something like defiance, like she'd been walked past too many times and decided she wouldn't look away first anymore. I didn't speak, didn't move. My jaw locked tight. She looked me dead in the eye and said, with an accent that bent English around the edges, trembling but direct, "Please choose me as your wife." I blinked once. That was all. It took longer for the words to land than it did for her to say them. No preamble, no story. Just the kind of statement that knocks the air out of you, not from volume, but from the way it carries weight that don't belong in a stranger's mouth. She didn't say it again, didn't explain. Just stood there, chest rising fast, like she'd put her last coin on the table and didn't expect to win the hand. She made no effort to cover herself, didn't shift her stance, didn't fold her arms across the tear in her dress. That alone told me more than words. I looked at the bruises, the blood, the dirt caked on her calves. I looked hard, the way a man looks when he's trying to find a lie. But she wasn't trying to seduce me. She wasn't playing at helplessness either. It was something else, practical, final, like she'd run out of options and figured one honest sentence was better than all the pretty ones. I didn't trust sudden things. Not people who showed up without invitation, not offers that didn't explain themselves, but I also wasn't blind. There was something in her face that I recognized, even though I'd never seen her before. That look people get when they've run out of safe places and still decide to stand up straight. Rachel had that look the last week before she died, like she was holding her soul together with fraying thread and daring the world to touch her one more time. I swallowed hard and asked, voice rough from disuse, "You alone?" She nodded once. "No husband?" Another shake of the head. I stepped back, just a little, chest tight, unsure why my stomach turned the way it did. It wasn't nerves, it was recognition, familiarity, where there shouldn't be any. She looked like someone who'd never expected kindness, only decisions, the kind that weren't hers to make. "What's your name?" I asked. A pause, then one word. "Tala." No last name, no history offered. I didn't ask for more. I turned without another word and walked back toward the cabin. I opened the door, slow and quiet, like I had every day for the last 3 years. Only this time, I wasn't the only one stepping through it. She followed. Her hip brushed my arm as she passed, not on purpose, just the simple fact of 2 people moving through the same narrow doorway. But it made my skin jump, and I heard her breath catch too, like we'd both touched something neither of us had permission to feel, and that was how it began, not with love, not even with trust, just 2 broken people, 1 open door, and a silence we were both too tired to fill. The door clicked shut behind us with a low sound, dull against the quiet outside. The light had thinned into red-orange streaks spilling through the cracks in the wood, and inside, the cabin felt smaller than usual, like it was holding its breath along with me. I didn't speak. I didn't know what to say, and truth be told, part of me didn't want to break the stillness. It had been mine for years. I'd learned to live with silence the way a man learns to live with pain. It wasn't welcome, but it became familiar. She stood just past the threshold, her bare feet on the worn boards, her hands still loose at her sides, like she hadn't yet decided if this was safety or just another kind of trap. Her eyes moved around the room slow, thoughtful, taking in the stove, the cot, the narrow shelf with my Bible and 2 tin cups, the water basin, the chair I'd made myself with aching fingers and too much time. She didn't look disappointed. She didn't look grateful either. Just quiet, like someone used to not having much. I went to the stove, didn't look back at her. My body moved the way it always did, like muscle remembered what my mind didn't have words for. I ladled water from the dented bucket and held it out to her. No words, just the motion of offering something that felt like it should mean more than it did. She took it with both hands and drank slow. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, I don't think, but exhaustion. Like the weight she'd carried to get here was still dragging at her bones. She didn't ask for more. She just held the empty ladle like it was the last thing tethering her to the floor. "You with a wagon train?" I asked finally, voice low. She nodded. "Where?" A pause, her eyes lowering. "North, Santa Fe Trail." "Where are they now?" "Gone," she said, voice catching a little at the end, not like she was breaking, just cracking open a little at the edge. "They said I was slowing them." She didn't look up, didn't defend herself, didn't ask me to disagree, just said it like a fact, like she'd been told that enough times to believe it. That part stung me. I'd seen it before, people tossed aside like they weren't worth the weight, especially women without names, without claims, a bruised woman, a woman not spoken for. Easy to forget, easier to leave. I didn't say any of that. Instead, I moved to the shelf and pulled down an old blanket. I set it on the floor in the corner and said, "You sleep there tonight. We'll figure the rest out come morning." She didn't argue, didn't seem surprised. She just knelt down slowly, stiff from walking, sore in ways she didn't show. She spread the blanket across the floor with care, like it still mattered. When she winced and slid one hand to her ribs beneath the torn edge of her dress, I noticed but didn't ask. Pain was something I understood. It didn't always need an audience. I went to the trunk near the bed and pulled out a clean shirt, old, stiff cotton, too big for her, but clean. I held it out. She hesitated, then took it with both hands. Her eyes flicked to mine just once, and when her fingers brushed against mine, it was a quick thing. But neither of us moved away right after. That startled me more than it should have. She stood with a limp and turned her back to me. I turned too, giving her the space she didn't ask for but probably needed. Behind me, the sound of cloth falling, soft fabric brushing skin, her breath pulling in and out, just barely audible. No words, no shame, just necessity. When I turned back around, she was sitting on the blanket in my shirt, sleeves past her hands, hem halfway to her knees, arms wrapped around her legs, chin resting on her knees. Her eyes followed me, not afraid, not hopeful, just watchful, like she was waiting to see what kind of man I really was. I sat on the edge of the cot, pulled off my boots, ran a hand through my hair. My whole body felt like it was made of splinters. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I asked, not angry, just needing to know, "Why say that? Choose me as your wife. Why those words?" She looked down, her thumb tracing the grain in the wood beneath her. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost like it wasn't meant for the room at all. "Because I knew you'd understand what they meant." I waited. They left me because I wasn't someone's, a woman alone. She doesn't count for much. But if someone claimed me, even just a little, I mattered. She paused, then lifted her gaze, eyes steady now. But I didn't want pity. I didn't want saving. I wanted someone to decide, not rescue, just stay. I stared at her, feeling something tighten in my chest I hadn't felt since Rachel died. Not grief, not sorrow, just something waking up again. She laid down after that, curled on her side, pulled the blanket around her shoulders. Her knees stayed tucked, her body shaped like someone who'd learned to sleep expecting hurt. I stood, walked to the lantern, and blew it out. Darkness settled in. For a while, we didn't say anything. We just lay there, not touching, not speaking, but not entirely alone either. In the quiet, I heard her voice again, soft as thread. "You were a soldier?" I nodded, then answered, "Yeah, Union." She paused. "Family?" "Had one." "Me too." That was it. Two strangers, one small room, and something beginning in the dark that neither of us knew how to name. Morning slid in slow, the way it always did out here, creeping through the cracks in the cabin walls, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. The sky shifted from deep blue to that gray-orange haze that meant another hot one was coming. I'd been lying there with my eyes open for a while, staring at the ceiling like it might give me answers I wasn't brave enough to ask for. I hadn't really slept, not from fear. No, not that. It was just the habit of being alone for too long. My body didn't trust stillness anymore. It flinched at peace, always waiting for the next strike, even when none came. I heard her shift before I saw her. The soft drag of fabric, the quiet sound of breath adjusting. I turned my head and found her still curled on the floor where I'd left her, arms tucked under her head like a child, knees drawn in tight. My shirt hung loose around her body, sleeves bunched at her elbows, one shoulder bare where the collar had slipped down. A bruise curved across the bone faded now, but still deep, still there. She wasn't shivering, but she held herself like she was cold, or like she'd learned to take up as little space as possible just to feel safe. I sat up, my back cracking with the kind of sound that reminded me I wasn't young anymore. I pulled on my boots, slow, quiet. Part of me still didn't know what to do with her being here, but another part deeper, buried under years of dust and grief, already couldn't imagine her not being here. I didn't speak, not at first. I stepped out onto the porch, filled a tin cup from the water barrel, and just stood there, letting the dry air settle on my skin. A few crows picked at the far end of the field. The road was empty, still. The kind of morning where nothing moved and everything waited. I liked mornings like that. Gave me time to think. And Lord, I had plenty to think about. When I stepped back inside, she was awake. Sitting upright now, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were on the cup in my hand, not asking, just looking. I handed it to her without a word. She took it and drank. Slow, grateful in the way of someone who's had too many days without enough. "Thank you," she said quietly. I nodded. "You hungry?" She paused, then nodded too. Not eager, just honest. I crossed to the cabinet and opened a tin of beans and cut some of the stale bread I'd been living on. Nothing fancy, just enough to fill the space between silence and need. I heated the beans over the stove, watching her from the corner of my eye. She hadn't tried to stand yet, probably sore. Maybe worse. I saw her rub one ankle slow, wincing. That foot was bad, swollen, sprained, maybe worse. I'd seen it before, women pushed off wagons, forced to walk through brush and rock with no shoes, like their pain was just another burden no one wanted to carry. She caught me watching. "What?" she asked, quiet but not afraid. "Your foot," I said. "It's bad." She looked down. "I can still work. You don't need to." She cut me off. "I won't stay for free." Her voice was firmer than the night before, still low, but sure. Something in it made me pause, not because she challenged me, but because she meant it. Every word. She didn't want a handout. She wanted to stand, even if it hurt. I didn't argue. I just handed her the plate, bread and beans balanced rough. "You eat. We'll talk about work later." She took it, and for the first time I saw something soften in her. Not much, but enough to notice, enough to feel it. I sat in the chair near the door, chewing on a piece of bread, watching her as she ate. The morning light caught the curve of her face, made the sunburn look less angry. Her lips weren't so cracked now. She held the plate in both hands like someone raised with manners, not wildness. That confused me a little. She wasn't feral. She wasn't careless. She was just broken and still standing. "You speak good English," I said after a while. She looked at me over the plate. "My father made me learn." I nodded. "He was white?" "No," she said. "Apache. But he told me if I couldn't speak both, I wouldn't last long outside the tribe." I leaned back in the chair. "He teach you anything else?" Her gaze didn't waver. "How to ride, how to trap, how to fish, how to not die." There was no pride in her voice, just truth, like all of it was just how life had to be. She looked at me then, head tilted slightly. "You live alone?" 3 years now." She hesitated. "You lost someone." I nodded. "Yeah." "Your wife?" Another nod. She waited, then asked, "Children?" "One." There was a long silence after that, the kind that didn't ask for more. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, she said, "I'm sorry." I didn't answer, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I didn't know how to let that kind of softness in without it hurting worse. Outside, the wind picked up, dust brushing against the walls, another hot day rising. I stood, checked the sights on my rifle. Old habit, still sharp. "You stay inside today," I said. "Rest that foot." She narrowed her eyes. "I can still help." "You will. Later." She didn't argue, just clenched her jaw. That fire in her, it wasn't pride, it was survival, and I respected it. I opened the door, paused, glanced over my shoulder. You got any trouble with snakes? She raised an eyebrow. I know which ones to kill. That pulled something out of me, halfway between a breath and almost a laugh. I stepped outside, boots finding the path to the fence, but my thoughts didn't follow me like they used to. They stayed behind, with her, with Tala. By the time the sun climbed high enough to make the porch boards hot underfoot, she was already out there, limping slow in my old shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows, that swollen ankle dragging a little but not stopping her. She had the dented tin cup in hand, walked it to the barrel outside like she'd done it 100 times. I didn't tell her to. She didn't ask if she could. She just did. And that was something I noticed right away with Tala. She never waited for permission, but she didn't take what wasn't hers either. She moved like someone who'd had everything taken before and knew better than to reach too fast. I was on the porch, sharpening a dull hatchet, letting the metal sing low and even. I watched her from the corner of my eye. Her hair was still damp from where she'd washed it with the last of the morning water, hung in a thick braid down her back, dark as river stone. She drank, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and turned to look across the field like it belonged to her too. How many acres? She asked. I didn't expect her to speak first. 25, I said. Only 10 worth a damn. She nodded once, still looking out at the dry rows of corn that hadn't seen rain in weeks. You work it alone? Since Rachel died. She didn't flinch at the name, didn't tilt her head or give me pity eyes. She just stood quite beside me while the wind pulled at the shirt hanging from her hips, dust clinging to her bare legs. Let me help, she said, quiet but clear. I looked at her. That ankle was still purple around the bone, her foot stiff and swollen, but her voice didn't waver. With that foot? I asked. I can carry, sort, clean. You're feeding me. I'll work. I didn't argue. I went to the crate by the porch, handed her a bundle of old tools that needed oiling. Start with these. Sit in the shade. She took the crate, limped to the edge of the porch, and sat cross-legged. Her fingers moved with a kind of careful rhythm, separating wood from metal, stacking handles, setting aside rusted nails. She didn't talk, didn't ask questions, just worked. And that silence didn't feel like tension. It felt like something else, like maybe she needed the stillness the same way I did. I spent the morning walking the fence line, fixing what I could. Every time I glanced back at the house, she was there, sorting, wiping, arranging, making order out of whatever I'd let slip. By midday, I brought her a cold tin of beans and a strip of dried meat. She didn't thank me, just nodded and ate beside me, shoulder to shoulder on the porch steps. No conversation, no smiles. But something had shifted. The air between us had weight now, not heavy, not uncomfortable, just real. When she handed me the empty tin, her fingers brushed mine. Not a mistake, not a move either. Just a touch. Her skin was warm, rough. Worked raw from scraping metal all morning. I didn't pull away. She didn't either. I stood and grabbed my rifle. Going to town, I said. She looked up, her eyes unreadable. Why? Supplies, grain, soap. Town won't like me. I don't like town. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. First flicker of humor between us. You'll ride? She asked. I shook my head. Town's 5 miles. I walk. Alone? Nobody comes with me. She didn't stop me, just watched. I walked the road, 2 hours with nothing but sun on my neck and dust underfoot. Used to be I liked it. That stretch of quiet between here and Delmore gave me time to breathe, but today my mind didn't settle like it used to. I kept hearing her voice. Let me help. Not a plea, an offer, and damn if that didn't stick with me harder than it should have. When I reached the general store, the clerk gave me a look, not a question, not yet, but his eyes drifted to the extra cans of beans I bought. The second bar of soap, a length of cloth that sure as hell wasn't for me. He raised an eyebrow. You got company? I met his eyes. I got work. I didn't say more. Outside, the sheriff caught me near the well. He was chewing on root tobacco like he always did, slow and smug. You been seen with someone? He asked, casual-like. What's it to you? He leaned in. Got word a wagon passed through, said they left a stray. Apache girl, said she was trouble. My jaw tightened. Don't know her. He squinted, searching my face for weakness. If you do, might be best not to keep her. Folks don't like that sort around here. Can stir things up. If she stirs anything, I said, I'll handle it. I walked off, didn't give him a chance to say more. By the time I got home, sun was just kissing the ridgeline. The porch glowed gold. She was still there, tools neatly sorted, a bucket of gray water beside her, handles drying on the railing. She stood when she saw me. You're limping, she said. Town's far, I muttered. You got food? I handed her the sack. She didn't ask what was in it, didn't say thank you. Just turned and walked inside like it was her place too now. And somehow, it was. That night, something was different. Not in the air exactly, but in how the cabin felt when I stepped back through the door. She'd been busy while I was gone. The corner where she slept had been swept, the blanket folded sharper, even the floor looked cleaner. She'd found the old broom I kept tucked behind the stove, and I could see the lines she'd dragged it through the dust. The bucket sat near the door, water dark from scrubbing. She didn't say anything about it, didn't wait to be noticed. She just moved about like someone who didn't ask to belong but decided to anyway. I set the supplies down on the table. She walked over, quiet, steady on that bad ankle, and started unpacking the sack like it was routine. It should have felt strange, this woman going through my things, standing barefoot in my shirt with her hair tied back in a rough twine braid, but it didn't. It felt right. Not comfortable, not yet, but right. Like the sound of wind through cracked shutters or the creak of floorboards I'd memorized years ago. She fit into the space, not by force or by asking, but by presence, by choosing not to leave. We ate in near silence. 2 tin plates, beans, a piece of stale bread each. She sat on the floor, back against the table leg, closer than before. Not across from me now, but near. When I leaned back in the chair, her elbow almost brushed my boot. I didn't move it. She didn't shift away. That closeness, it wasn't a claim. It wasn't even comfort. It was just there, solid and quiet. When I stood to turn down the cot for sleep, I noticed she hadn't unrolled her blanket in the corner. I didn't say anything at first, just looked from the folded wool to where she stood near the stove, eyes following me like she was waiting for a door to be opened or shut. She stepped toward the bed, stood there, still. You sure? I asked, voice low. She nodded, no hesitation. I pulled back the blanket, stepped aside. She slipped beneath it, moving slow, her body stiff like it had forgotten how to lie down soft. I sat beside her, mattress creaking under our weight. I lay back, not touching her, but aware of every inch between us. She turned slightly back to the wall, her breath brushing my arm once, steady and warm. She didn't say anything, neither did I. But we stayed. Morning came with that same hush of light stretching across the floorboards. I rolled over slow, expecting the chill of solitude, but her body was still there. One arm draped across my middle, her face tucked into the crook of my shoulder like it belonged there. I lay still a long while, listening to her breathe. There was a peace in it I hadn't known in years, a peace I hadn't thought I was allowed anymore. Later, when I rode into town again, another list in my head, more beans, more salt, the usual. She stood on the porch behind me, just under the shade. She didn't ask to come. She didn't ask to stay. She just watched. That told me everything I needed to know. She understood what town meant, what they'd say, what they'd think. But more than that, she understood me. Understood that I wasn't afraid of them. I just didn't waste my voice where it wouldn't matter. At the store, I picked out everything I needed, then stopped in front of the shelf where the women's shoes sat. I hadn't stood there in years. They were plain leather, small, sturdy, not for decoration, for use. I held them in my hands a long time, not thinking of Rachel, thinking of Tala, her bruised feet, her pride, her silence. You setting up for a bride, or just pick something off the trail? The clerk asked, voice oily and casual. I didn't look at him. I set the shoes on the counter, met his eyes. She's with me, he snorted. Ain't no law against it. Just don't bring her into town is all. I didn't raise my voice. I never did. If she wants to walk this town, she will. The sheriff showed up not long after. leaned on the counter like he had something wise to say. "You keeping her still?" I stared at him. "People say she's Apache," he went on. "Stirs old feelings, buried kin, buried grudges." "She's patching sacks, not stirring anything," I said. "She's mine." That silenced him, not because I threatened, just because he finally understood I wasn't going to bend. When I came home, she was right where I left her, kneeling beside the porch, weaving something from a rag. I set the shoes in front of her. She didn't reach for them. She looked up at me. "They don't want me there," she said. "I know," I said, "but they don't decide." She stared at the shoes, then me. "Why are you doing this?" I sat beside her, heavy and tired and sure. I looked out over the field and let the truth come slow. When Rachel died, I didn't speak for 2 years. People came by, offered help. I turned them all away. I turned to her. Then you showed up, half dead, bleeding, ribs bruised, and you said, "Please choose me," like it was nothing. She whispered, "I meant it." "I know," I said. "And every day since, you stayed, worked with busted hands, slept beside me without asking for anything. I want you here, and I don't care what town thinks. I'm not leaving you out there." She didn't cry, but her eyes shone. She bent forward and picked up the shoes, held them like they were something sacred. Not because they were shoes, because someone thought she was worth them. The morning didn't start with words. It rarely did. Out here, the day announced itself in smaller ways. The way the light broke across the basin, the low groan of wood warming in the sun, the hush of coffee poured into a tin cup. I was on the porch, sitting where I always sat, knife in hand, sharpening the edge of a hatchet that had seen better years. The rhythm of it kept my thoughts steady, like prayer without speaking. Tala stepped out just as the wind picked up, her dress tugging around her knees, loose gray-blue cotton I'd traded for on my last trip to town. It was a little too big in the shoulders, but it suited her. Simple, strong. She still didn't wear shoes first thing in the morning, said her feet wanted to feel the ground. She set a mug down beside me and leaned against the porch rail, her braid hanging low over one shoulder. "You think they'll come back?" she asked, her eyes on the fields, not me. "If they do," I said without looking up, "they better come ready." She nodded, like that answer sat right with her. Then she turned to me, arms crossed, something settled in her voice. "Marry me." The blade in my hand stopped mid-stroke. Not because I was surprised, not really, but because of the way she said it. Not hopeful, not desperate, just clear, like she'd made up her mind and didn't see any need for ceremony. She stepped in front of me, fierce and still. "You said I was yours," she said. "Then make it true." I looked at her a long time, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I did. I stood, slow, went inside, came back with my only clean shirt, shrugged it on, wiped my hands on my jeans. "We'll go into town," I said. She blinked, not expecting me to move that fast. "That won't go over quiet." "I don't care." We saddled the old mule. I hadn't ridden in months, but the weight of her behind me, one arm around my waist, the other resting a rifle in her lap that felt like balance, like this is how the West was meant to be faced, not alone, not silent, but chosen, side by side. The ride into town stirred up more dust than conversation, but when we dismounted in front of the chapel, the reaction was instant. Doors shut, blinds drawn. Folks scurried like ants from a kicked hill. I didn't flinch. I walked straight through that door, Tala beside me, her chin high and steady. The preacher looked up from his book, saw her, opened his mouth to protest. I reached into my pocket, laid a silver coin on the pulpit. "We need 2 words untaught," I said. "Just 2. Then we'll go." The preacher's eyes jumped from her to me. "You sure?" "I am," she said, voice like stone worn smooth. He opened the book. 5 minutes later, we were husband and wife. No kiss, no crowd, just her hand in mine, small and warm and steady, and mine not letting go. We stepped back into the sun. The sheriff stood across the street, arms crossed, jaw tight. I met his eyes, didn't blink. He spit into the dirt, then tipped his hat, didn't say a word. That was enough. We rode home with the heat at our backs and the weight of the town behind us. That night, we didn't undress each other like strangers fumbling in the dark. We moved like people who'd earned this through fire, silence, sweat, and stubbornness. When she touched me, it wasn't to ask permission. It was to claim space. When I kissed her, it wasn't to possess. It was to remember how it felt to be needed and not feared. She let the dress fall from her shoulders without shame. Her skin was smooth and marked by life, not flawless, not untouched, but lived in. When I kissed the scars, she didn't flinch. When she traced the bullet wound near my ribs, I didn't pull away. We didn't rush. We didn't pretend. We just stayed there, in that small room, in the quiet, where everything had changed. By morning, she was asleep against me, her arm draped over my chest, her breath soft at my neck. And for the first time in years, I didn't wake hollow. I woke whole. The next time I rode into town, she didn't ask to come. She didn't ask to stay behind either. She just stood in the shade of the porch, barefoot, one hand on the rail, watching me saddle up. Her braid was clean and tight, her dress brushed free of dust, and though she said nothing, I saw it plain in her eyes, that tight pull of worry she didn't want me to see. I gave her a nod, slow and quiet, and she gave one back. She trusted me, but she didn't trust them. I rode in with a list in my head: grain, salt, coffee, ammunition, and something I hadn't bought in years, shoes, for her. It felt like a small thing, but when I held that pair of plain leather flats in my hand, something in me stilled. They weren't delicate. They weren't meant to impress. Just strong, simple, enough to carry her without pain. I turned them over once, twice, like the weight of them mattered. "You settin' up for church, Eli?" the clerk asked from behind the counter, smirking like a boy who'd never had to bury his own. "You finally pick a wife or just drag something off the trail?" He said it quiet, low enough for deniability, but loud enough for two others near the back to hear. I didn't give him a smile. I didn't give him anything. I set the shoes down slow. "She's with me." He let out a soft chuckle, the kind that curdled in the air. "Ain't no law against it. Just don't bring her into town is all." I looked him dead in the eye. "If she wants to walk this town, she will." He looked away first. That's when the sheriff stepped in, always chewing something rude or habit, I couldn't tell. He moved slow, like he'd already decided how the conversation would go. "You been keeping that girl still?" he asked, not accusing, just poking. I said nothing. "Folks say she's Apache," he continued. "You know what kind of worry that stirs? These people, they don't forget easy." "She's patching sacks," I said. "Shooting straighter than half your deputies. She hasn't raised her voice, hasn't asked for anything." "That don't matter neither," he said. "It matters to me." He chewed slower then. I could see him deciding whether to press or back off. Finally, he took the easier road and stepped back toward the door. "I'm just telling you, Eli, don't expect quiet if she shows up on market day." I paid in full and walked out without another word. By the time I got home, the sun was settling low behind the ridge, casting gold across the field, like it was trying to pretend the world hadn't turned bitter. She was still there, sitting cross-legged on the porch, tools laid out neat beside her, bucket of dirty water off to one side. She'd hung the cleaned handles on the railing to dry, like she'd always known how to make order out of what other folks left to rot. She looked up as I approached, stood slow. "Trouble?" she asked. I set the shoes in front of her. She didn't touch them. "They don't want me there," she said. "I know," I replied. She looked at me again, harder this time. "Why are you doing this?" I sat beside her, slow like always, elbows on my knees, hands open. The field stretched out ahead of us, endless, dry, real. When Rachel died, I said, I didn't speak to anyone for 2 years, not one soul. People came by, offered help. I turned every one of them away. I turned to her. Then you showed up, half dead, bleeding, ribs bruised. You looked me in the eye and said, "Please choose me," like it was the last thing you had to give. She whispered, "I meant it." "I know, and every day since you've stayed. You didn't ask for more than what you needed. You didn't take more than what I gave. You worked with busted hands. You shot straight. You slept beside me without asking for anything more. I want you here. And I don't care what town thinks. I'm not leaving you out there." She didn't cry. She didn't speak right away either. Just looked down at the shoes like they were something more than leather. Then she bent forward and picked them up, holding them in both hands like she wasn't ready to put them on. Not yet, but she'd carry them just the same. Later that night, we sat out back behind the house where the firelight flickered low. I passed her a tin cup, and she passed it back without a word. When she leaned her head against my shoulder, I didn't move. When her fingers slid beneath mine, I closed around them. There was no kiss, no speech. But anyone watching would have seen it clear. A man who'd made a choice, and a woman who didn't have to ask anymore. 3 nights after I stood my ground in town, the wind changed. Not in the sky, but in my gut. There's a feeling that creeps in when you've lived too long with trouble, like the air's got a warning tucked inside it. That night, just past sundown, I stepped outside to cool off and smelled something wrong. Not livestock, not wood smoke, something sweeter, sharper, oil and burn. Then I saw it, orange flickering at the edge of the northern fence line, tucked behind the hill like it was trying to sneak in under cover of dark. I was already moving when I heard the door open behind me. Tala came out barefoot, hair loose, braid unraveling, rifle in hand. "They're testing you," she said, her voice flat, steady as stone. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. I grabbed the bucket from beside the door, filled it at the barrel without spilling a drop, and took off at a run. By the time we reached the fence, 10 feet of dry brush were already up in flames, licking low at the wood rails, smoke pushing thick into the air. Someone had soaked it with lamp oil first. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't meant to kill, just to scare. Just enough to say, "We're watching." Tala didn't flinch. She dropped to her knees at the edge of the fire, used wet cloths to stomp at the flames, hands moving fast and sure. I doused what I could with the bucket, went back twice more, until the water was gone and only steam rose from blackened grass. The lowest part of the fence was gone, scorched clean through. The message had been sent. Afterward, we stood in the dark, breathing hard, sweat running down our necks, faces shining in the moonlight. My hands trembled from the heat, from the run, maybe from something deeper I didn't name. I looked over at her suit on her cheek, knees torn from crawling, hair stuck to her neck. She was staring into the dark where the fire had come from, waiting for something, maybe daring it to come again. "You afraid?" I asked. She swallowed hard, then shook her head. "No," she said. "Not anymore." I believed her. The next morning, the sheriff came again. This time, he didn't knock, didn't tip his hat, just stood at the edge of the porch like he was waiting to be obeyed. "Heard about a fire," he said, real casual. "Unfortunate. Weather's dry." "You send it?" I asked, not raising my voice. He lifted both hands, mock innocent. "Wasn't me. But folks around here, they don't take kindly to you shelter in one of theirs." "She's not theirs," I said. "She's mine." That landed harder than I expected. His jaw shifted. His eyes narrowed. Maybe he was used to men dodging, hiding. I wasn't one of them. "Keep her out of sight," he said, "before someone else makes that fire bigger." I stepped forward, boots thudding heavy on the planks. I didn't yell, didn't curse. I just said what needed saying, loud enough for the trees to hear. "Anyone comes for her again," I said, "they won't get another warning." He stared at me a long time, jaw tight, fingers twitching at his belt. Then he turned and left without a word. That night, she didn't sleep curled in the corner. She didn't lie at the edge of the cot like she was afraid of taking too much. She lay close, her body warm against mine under the thin blanket. One hand rested on my chest, claiming space like it had always been hers. I didn't stop her. My fingers found the curve of her hip, rested there quiet, steady. When her mouth found mine, it wasn't hunger, it wasn't fear. It was the kind of kiss that says, "I'm still here, and so are you." She undressed slow, not ashamed, not shy, just unhurried, like it didn't need to be proved or earned. My shirt slipped from her shoulders, and there she was, brown skin lit by firelight, scarred and smooth, a map of what she'd survived. I kissed the places others had marked with pain. She didn't flinch. When her hands moved over my chest, fingers brushing the old bullet wound, I didn't pull away. We moved like people who'd learned to hurt, then learned to heal 1 inch at a time. We didn't speak, we didn't name it. But by the time the moon fell behind the ridge, she was asleep on my chest, breath slow, one arm tucked beneath me. I lay awake for a long while, Not because I was haunted, but because I wasn't. Because the fire hadn't driven her off. Because the warning hadn't sent me running. Because for the first time in years, I had something to lose again, and I wasn't scared of that, not anymore. She didn't go back to the floor that night. I noticed before she even moved, the way she looked at the cot knot like it was something she had to earn, but like she'd already chosen it, chosen me. I was standing by the door, watching her from the corner of my eye. She didn't ask, she didn't explain. She just stood beside the bed and waited. "You sure?" I asked. She nodded once, steady, calm. Not nervous, not shy, just sure in that quiet way she had. I pulled the blanket back and stepped aside, same as I'd done the night before, only this time there was no distance between us. She slipped beneath the covers, turned onto her side, her back to the wall, and I sat down beside her. The mattress gave under our weight, creaked like it hadn't held two people in far too long. I lay back slow, careful not to crowd her. I didn't know what to expect, didn't want to ruin the quiet with reaching too fast. But then her body shifted closer, just a little, her shoulder brushing my arm, her breath warming the space between us. She didn't speak, and neither did I. We just lay there, breathing the same air, hearts beating slow and close. When she moved again, it was gentle. Her hand found my chest, fingers resting just above my ribs, not searching, just settling. Like she needed to know I was real, like she needed to claim something after having nothing for so long. I didn't stop her. My fingers drifted to her waist, rested there, soft and steady. The shape of her felt like memory and promise all at once. She turned to face me in the dark. I felt her breath against my jaw, warm and slow. Then her voice, barely a whisper. "Eli." Just that, my name, said like it meant something. I kissed her, not rushed, not rough, just real. My lips against hers, our breath folding together like we'd been waiting for it without knowing it. She kissed me back, her hand rising to my neck, thumb brushing my jaw like she was trying to memorize the shape of me. We didn't speak after that. Words weren't needed. What we had was made in quiet earned, in looks, in work, in staying. So we moved slow, like people who weren't in a hurry to prove anything. When her shirt slipped from her shoulders, she didn't cover herself. She watched me, steady, letting me see her. Brown skin marked by the road behind her, bruises fading, scars healed over. I kissed the places that hurt, the places others had tried to take from her. She let me. Her hands found my chest, traced the bullet scar near my shoulder, the one that never quite stopped aching when the weather turned. She touched it like it didn't scare her, like it didn't make me broken. We lay back down together, closer now. No space between us, her head against my chest, one leg hooked over mine, her breath soft at the crook of my neck, her body warm and solid beside me. My hand rested at the small of her back, fingers spread, holding her like something I didn't want to lose again. I didn't sleep, not right away. I just watched the ceiling, listened to the way her breathing evened out, how she shifted closer in her sleep like she'd done it 100 times before. And I realized something as the fire died low beside us, throwing shadows up the walls. I didn't feel hollow anymore. For years I'd walked around with a hole in my chest where my wife and daughter used to live. I'd filled it with silence, with work, with distance. I'd let it harden around the edges so nothing else could ever fall in. But here she was, this woman who came to my door barefoot and bruised, asking nothing more than to be chosen, and she filled the silence without making a sound. Not because I needed saving, not because she did either, but because something in both of us knew how to stay, how to hold, how to begin again. The fire hadn't chased her off. The sheriff's warning hadn't made me step back, and she hadn't begged, I hadn't promised. We just stayed, and that, somehow, was more than most people ever found. I looked down at her, sleeping there like she belonged, like this was hers too. And maybe it was, maybe it always had been. A week passed with no fire, no shouting in the dark, no rocks through the window. Just quiet. But out here, I'd learned quiet didn't always mean peace. Sometimes it was just the space between choices. And I could feel it, that pause before someone tried again, that breath the world takes right before it decides whether to leave you be or come crashing down. I kept my tools close, rifle closer, The mule was saddled more days than not, but the part of me that used to wait for the worst had started to shift, not soften exactly, but settle. And it had everything to do with the way she moved through my days. Tala didn't ask anymore. She just did. She washed the tin cups without being told, swept the corners I'd stopped seeing, kept her herbs wrapped tight on a shelf I cleared just for her. I built that life for one, but she fit in it like she was always supposed to. She didn't touch my scars like they were something to fix. She didn't shy from my silences. She let me be, and somehow still made room for herself beside me. That morning I was sitting on the porch, knife in one hand, sharpening slow and steady. Habit. Keeps the hands moving when the mind needs space. She stepped outside carrying coffee, barefoot as always, wearing the cotton dress I'd traded for in town. It hung loose on her frame, soft gray-blue brushing at her knees, her braids swinging low over one shoulder. She set the mug down beside me and leaned on the railing, looking out across the field like she'd been here all her life. "You think they'll come back?" she asked, voice calm. "If they do," I said without looking up, "they best come ready." She nodded, then turned toward me, arms crossed. Her eyes were steady, sharp in that way that didn't cut, just held. "Marry me." I paused, not from surprise, but because the words hit different now. Not like that first night, when she stood torn and trembling and asked me to choose her. This time, she wasn't asking. She was telling me her choice. "You said I was yours," she went on. "Then make it true." I looked at her, saw her as she was now, not bruised, not desperate, strong, clear, still limping a little, but no longer a woman trying to survive the next morning, a woman who knew what she wanted and was damn sure she was worth being wanted back. I nodded. "All right." She didn't smile, just gave that small, sure tilt of her chin. I stood, stepped back inside the cabin, came out with my one good shirt and buttoned it slow. Then I looked at her again. "We'll go into town." Her brows lifted just a little. "That won't go over quiet." "I don't care." We saddled the mule, first time in months. She rode behind me, one arm wrapped around my waist, the other cradling the rifle across her lap like a promise. Her chin was high. Her dress caught the wind as we rode. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. When we reached town, folks didn't whisper. They scattered. Doors shut. Blinds snapped closed. The preacher's chapel looked smaller than I remembered, though maybe it was just the weight we brought with us. I helped her down, hand on hers, and we walked in side by side. The preacher looked up, startled, his mouth already opening like he meant to tell us no. I reached into my pocket and laid a silver coin on the pulpit. "We need 2 words of Mishon," I said. "Just 2. Then we'll go." He looked from me to her. She stood tall, quiet, unmoving. "You sure?" he asked. "I am," she said. He opened his book, spoke the words. In less than 5 minutes we were husband and wife. No kiss, no ring, just the weight of her hand in mine, and mine not letting go. We stepped back out into the sunlight. The sheriff was across the street, arms folded, jaw tight. I met his eyes, held them. He spit into the dirt and tipped his hat, said nothing. We rode home with the sun on our backs and the whole town behind us. That night, we didn't make love like people reaching for something fragile. We touched like folks who had fought for this, bled for it, stayed for it. When she whispered my name, I kissed her like it meant everything, because it did. There was no final gunfight, no justice served, just us. 2 people the world tried to forget, building something quiet and stubborn out of dust and grit and skin. She kept a rifle by the door. I made room for her herbs beside the salt. We didn't call it love. We didn't need to. We just stayed. They never came back. Not the fire starters, not the ones who whispered in town, not the sheriff with his warnings chewed over like old tobacco. Maybe they were watching. Maybe they were waiting for someone else to make the first move. But after that day at the chapel, after she stood beside me in front of God, and a preacher too startled to object, they knew. We weren't hiding. We weren't asking. We had already decided, and there wasn't anything left to say. The days that followed weren't grand, and they weren't loud. But they were ours. Tala hung her herbs near the stove, tied neat in little bundles that filled the room with sharp, earthy scents. I built a second shelf to hold her jars. She kept the floors swept, the tools oiled, the coffee hot. Sometimes I caught her humming, low and under her breath, like the sound surprised even her. She still walked barefoot most mornings, said the dirt felt different now, less like punishment, more like home. I taught her to shoot with both hands, clean and sure. She took to it like she took to everything. Quiet, patient, determined. Her bruises faded. The limp got lighter. She started wearing the shoes I bought her, but not always. Only when it suited her. That felt right. She wasn't meant to be tamed, just allowed to grow. She didn't talk much about the wagon train or the people who left her behind. I didn't press. I knew what it was to be discarded. What mattered more was that she never looked back. And me, I started to breathe different. Not easier, maybe, but fuller. There were still nights I woke sweating, heart pounding from dreams I didn't remember. There were still days the grief came down like a sudden storm, but I wasn't alone in it anymore. She never asked me to explain, just sat close enough for me to feel her there. That was enough. One afternoon she was kneading dough near the window, hands dusted with flour, braid swinging low. She turned to me, calm as always, and said, "You should build a second chair." I blinked. "What for?" She gave me the faintest smile. "So we're not always sharing the same one." So I built her one, sturdy, with curved arms and a seat wide enough for her to tuck her feet under if she wanted. She used it that night, legs folded up, sipping coffee beside me while the wind moved through the cracks in the wall. Nothing dramatic, just comfort, just staying. That's what we learned, I think, staying. The world had tried to tear us down, wear us out, leave us in pieces, but we didn't ask for rescue, and we didn't offer it either. We just stayed, through fire, through silence, through the ache of being known and the fear of being loved again. People think love comes like thunder loud, sudden, unstoppable, but the kind that lasts. It's built different. It's in the way she lays her hand on my back when I don't speak, in the way I slice bread thinner now so it stretches farther. It's not grand, it's not perfect, but it's real, and real is rare. Sometimes I still ride into town. Folks nod now, some look away. But no one spits and no one dares speak her name in a way I wouldn't like. They saw us. They saw the fire. They saw what I'd do to keep her. That's enough. She comes with me sometimes, walks beside me, head high, doesn't flinch when the stairs land hard. We don't explain. We don't owe anyone that. At night, when the world quiets and the porch is warm from the day's heat, we sit side by side. Sometimes her head rests on my shoulder. Sometimes we just watch the wind shift across the field. We talk about building a coop come spring. Maybe goats, maybe not. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Just tomorrow, one day at a time. And in the space between all those small moments, I've come to understand something I wish I'd known earlier. You don't have to be whole to be chosen. You don't have to be strong to stay. You just have to show up and keep showing up, even when it's hard. Especially then. That's what Tala taught me. So if this story settled something in you, if it stirred up a quiet you've been carrying or reminded you that healing doesn't have to be loud, I'd be honored to know it. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you saw in it. What stayed with you? And if you want more stories like this, more dust and fire and love that doesn't ask to be pretty, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. Come sit with me again. We'll keep telling the truth, one quiet story at a time. Eli Ward.